before going to the next scripture which talks about the kings of the earth, it's probably a good idea for you to continue reading to the end of chapter 16, because immediately after mentioning that these kings of the earth are gathered together to a place called Armageddon, an angel pours out his bowl of wrath into the air and announces that it has come to pass. So now that these kings of the earth are gathered together to the place that's called Armageddon, it has come to pass. And towards the end of chapter 16, it talks about the destruction of Babylon the Great. So the next place that it mentions the kings of the earth is right at the start of the next chapter, chapter 17. And this is where the reader should begin to realize that yes, these are the kings of the earth, the same ones mentioned at the start of the book of Revelation, and you begin to understand the depth to which these kings have been undermined by Satan, and how far these kings of the earth have really departed from following Jesus. They no longer follow Jesus. So here we go. I'll read the first couple of verses of chapter 17. And one of the 7 angels that had the 7 bowls came and spoke with me, saying, Come, I will show you the judgment upon the great harlot, who sits on many waters, with whom the kings of the earth committed fornication, whereas those who inhabit the earth were made drunk with the wine of her fornication. So, once again, popular belief has it that these kings are pagan kings of nations which are on the earth today, but no. The book of Revelation is talking about kings of the earth, the same kings of the earth mentioned by the Apostle John in the first chapter of Revelation, and these are the kings of the earth who Jesus Christ rules over. The kings of the earth who are expected to rule the 12 tribes of Israel. And the harlot, the woman, eventually you'll find that she is Babylon the Great if you continue reading through chapter 17. But later on in chapter 17 it mentions 10 of these kings. And so if it's talking about kings of the earth at the start of the 17th chapter of the book of Revelation, then certainly if it picks out 10 specific kings, then it's also speaking about kings of the earth. 10 of these kings of the earth. And so let's read that scripture and see what these kings of the earth do. So chapter 17 mentions these 10 kings in verse 12. I'll start reading from there. And the 10 horns that you saw mean 10 kings who have not yet received a kingdom, but they do receive authority as kings 1 hour with the wild beast. These have one thought, and so they give their power and authority to the wild beast. These will battle with the Lamb, but because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, the Lamb will conquer them. Also, those called and chosen and faithful with him will do so. So, this scripture shows that these are kings without a kingdom. And just like the Apostle John said at the beginning of the book of Revelation, he is to be a kingdom. He doesn't have a kingdom yet to rule over, yet he is a king. So these are the Apostle John's peers, the same kind of people that the Apostle Paul spoke to in Corinth when he admonished them to stop ruling as kings because they didn't have a kingdom yet. So in pagan circumstances that would never happen. You would not have kings, 10 kings who did not yet have a kingdom. And yet in the book of Revelation, if you understand chapter 1, then it explains that these kings don't yet have a kingdom. John's peers do not yet have a kingdom. So these 10 kings are not pagan kings. They are chosen, anointed kings who have fallen and been deceived by those inspired utterances which were mentioned in chapter 16. Deceived by the wild beast, the false prophet, the demons. But notice in the verses I read in chapter 17, it said that these will battle with the Lamb. They will battle with Jesus Christ. They are battling in the great day of God the Almighty, just like it mentioned in chapter 16, but they're on the wrong side. They've been gathered together to Armageddon by the demons and the devil, and they're now battling against God. They're battling with the demons against Jesus Christ. This is very important to understand, especially if you're one of these kings or an anointed chosen one, one of the 144,000. Notice also in the scripture I read that they do get to rule 1 hour for just a short time with the wild beast. And so the wild beast is the one that uttered some of those inspired expressions which gathered them together. And so now they're on the side of the wild beast. They're on the side of the wild beast, the false prophet, the demons, and the dragon, Satan the devil. So they're now like Judas Iscariot, who went on the side of Satan and battled against Jesus Christ. He fought against Jesus Christ. Notice also that they gave their power and authority away. They gave it to the wild beast. And so just like when Esau gave away his inheritance to his brother Jacob for a bowl of soup, these 10 kings of the earth have given away their inheritance for the chance to rule for 1 hour. A bowl of soup. Think carefully about these things. Now remember also that New Testament scripture I read, which explained that Jesus promised to his 12 apostles that they might rule as kings over each of the 12 tribes of Israel. And one of the disclaimers was, those that follow me. Now notice, in this same scripture here that I've read in Revelation, what it says. It says, because he is Lord of lords and King of kings, the Lamb will conquer them. Who? The kings of the earth who've fallen away. Also, those called and chosen and faithful with him will do so. And so, those who follow Jesus Christ will conquer the 10 kings and the wild beast and Satan and the false prophet and the city of Babylon. They will conquer. The 10 kings who've been deceived by the wild beast and given the power and authority away will battle against the kings of the earth who decide to follow Jesus Christ, and yet they will not prevail. So before I go on to the next scripture, which talks about these kings of the earth, it would be a good idea to spend some time contemplating what you think the war of the great day of God the Almighty will be. Will it be a literal battle, guns and knives and swords and fights, or will it be a spiritual battle that these men are fighting? The ones that are following Jesus are fighting to save their brothers, and yet their brothers are deceived by Satan and are unwittingly battling against Jesus Christ. They've been deceived by these inspired utterances. So the battle is a spiritual one, being fought by God and also by Satan, and the people caught between are those who have been deceived by Satan to be gathered together to Armageddon, and those who follow Jesus. And it's a giant, enormous spiritual battle. And so these videos that I'm making are indeed a part of that battle. I hope to win some of these brothers. The kings of the earth are once again mentioned a couple of times in chapter 18 of the book of Revelation, and so I'll read some of those verses. I'll start with verse 2 and read to verse 3. It says, "And he cried out with a strong voice, saying, She has fallen, Babylon the Great has fallen, and she has become a dwelling place of demons, and a lurking place of every unclean exhalation, and a lurking place of every unclean and hated bird. For because of the wine of the anger of her fornication, all the nations have fallen victim. And the kings of the earth committed fornication with her. And the traveling merchants of the earth became rich due to the power of her shameless luxury. And so Babylon the Great is the place where the demons are, the place where the demons are gathering the kings of the earth together. Armageddon. Babylon the Great is that same place. Remember, it said that Babylon the Great has become the dwelling place of demons and a lurking place of every unclean exhalation. So these are the same unclean inspired utterances that came from the demons. And the place they're coming from is Babylon the Great. And so the place that they're gathering these kings together to is Babylon the Great. Armageddon. The next verse, verse 4 of chapter 18, is a very important verse, and so I'll read that one. And I heard another voice out of heaven say, "Get out of her, my people, if you do not want to share with her in her sins, and if you do not want to receive part of her plagues." So this is very important. It shows that there are righteous people who have been gathered together in this place, Babylon the Great. And it's the last chance. God's trying to urge them to get out, get away, to withdraw from the great city. And what is the great city? It's the holy city. It's the city that's been corrupted. Just like first century Jerusalem was corrupted, once again now the modern day kingdom, the modern day city, the great holy city, has been corrupted. And just like in the first century, Christians had to withdraw from Jerusalem when they saw the disgusting things, now also righteous people who've been captured inside the city need to withdraw again. They are inside the modern day holy city, which is about to be desolated. And this is a parallel to that scripture in Matthew 24, where it says, when you catch sight of the disgusting thing, withdraw, flee to the mountains. In the middle of chapter 18 of the book of Revelation, it mentions the kings of the earth once again. And so I'll read those scriptures, starting in verse 9. And the kings of the earth who committed fornication with her and lived in shameless luxury will weep and beat themselves in grief over her when they look at the smoke from the burning of her, while they stand at a distance because of their fear of her torment, and say, too bad, you great city, Babylon, you strong city, because in 1 hour your judgment has arrived." So notice that these kings of the earth will weep and beat themselves in grief. And so there's another scripture which mentions these kings weeping and gnashing their teeth. It's in Matthew chapter 24. Maybe I should read it now because it parallels exactly this scripture. So remember, the Apostle John at the start of the book of Revelation mentioned that he was writing it for his fellow slaves. This scripture in the book of Matthew chapter 24 also speaks about Jesus Christ's slaves. There's an evil and a faithful slave. And so listen to how this parallels the same scripture in Revelation chapter 18. I'll start at verse 48 of Matthew chapter 24. "But if ever that evil slave should say in his heart, 'My master is delaying,' and should start to beat his fellow slave, and should eat and drink with the confirmed drunkards, the master of that slave will come on a day that he does not expect, and in an hour that he does not know, and will punish him with the greatest severity, and will assign him his part with the hypocrites. There is where his weeping and the gnashing of his teeth will be." Yes, these slaves, the evil slave, are the same kings of the earth who have been gathered together to that place called Armageddon and are living in the corrupted city, Babylon the Great. They will weep and beat themselves in grief. So remember what it said in this scripture in Matthew chapter 24? It said he would come in an hour. I'll read it again. The master of that slave will come on a day that he does not expect, and in an hour that he does not know. And so now if we back up a few verses to verse 44, he says it again. On this account you too prove yourselves ready, because at an hour that you do not know, do not think to be it, the Son of Man is coming. It's the same judgment hour as the hour mentioned about the kings of the earth in Revelation chapter 18. Let's read what the kings of the earth say in Revelation chapter 18. Too bad, you great city, Babylon, you strong city, because in 1 hour your judgment has arrived. It's the same hour that occurs to the evil slave. The same slaves that John is writing the book of Revelation to, in the hopes of saving them, helping them to see through Satan's unrighteous deception. So these 10 kings in chapter 17 who give their power away to the wild beast and battle with the Lamb, these are the same 10 kings, the leaders of the tribes of Israel, or potential leaders, who are mentioned by Jacob in Genesis chapter 49. And this is their blessing in the final part of the days. And now perhaps we understand why the blessing they got in Genesis chapter 49 shows that they'll have a very mundane prospect for the final part of the days. These are the 10, which means there's 2 who do attain that blessing. 2 left. 2 of the 12 men will attain that blessing, just as Jacob said in chapter 49 when he blessed his 12 sons. Only 2 of them attain the blessing. So now I'd like to go back to the Old Testament in Zechariah chapter 10 and read a verse about these 2 who attain the blessing, 2 of the sons of Jacob. And this is what it says in Zechariah and chapter 10 verse 6. And I will make the house of Judah superior, and the house of Joseph I shall save. And I will give them a dwelling, for I will show them mercy. And they must become like those whom I had not cast off. For I am Jehovah their God, and I shall answer them. So what happened to the other 10 sons of Jacob? Because it was not just Judah and Joseph. There were 10 other sons. 10 potential leaders of the tribes of Israel. They are not saved by God. They are cast off. Only 2 of those sons will receive an extraordinary blessing and a dwelling place with God. So now moving forward in the book of Revelation chapter 18, we should read the last verse. And it says there in verse 24, yes, in her was found the blood of the prophets. In who? Babylon the Great. And of the holy ones, and of all those who have been slaughtered on the earth. And so it's the same place as Jerusalem. That's where the prophets and the holy ones were slaughtered. And so Babylon the Great is the modern day city of Jerusalem, Jesus Christ's kingdom, which has been thoroughly undermined by Satan, and therefore is desolated. Now what about the faithful kings of the earth, the ones who do follow Jesus Christ and are not deceived into being gathered together in this place called Armageddon? Will they be inside the city of Babylon, Babylon the Great? Well, the Apostle Paul gives an indication that no, they won't be. They'll be reproached. They'll be beaten by the evil slave and excluded from the city. They'll speak up for the sake of Jesus Christ, and they'll suffer persecution for having done that from their own anointed brothers, the evil slave. And Paul supports this concept that they'll be outside of this city in Hebrews. And in chapter 13, verses 12 and 13, I'll read them for you. This is what Paul said. Hence Jesus also, that he might sanctify the people with his own blood, suffered outside the gate. Let us then go forth to him outside the camp, bearing the reproach he bore. For we do not have here a city that continues, but we are earnestly seeking the one to come. And so the modern day city of Jerusalem, Babylon the Great, is in the same condition. It's not the kingdom any longer that the faithful kings of the earth want to be a part of. They're excluded. Now the next place in the book of Revelation where it mentions the kings of the earth is in Revelation chapter 19. And in verse 19, it mentions what will happen to them and what these kings of the earth, the Apostle John's peers, the evil slave, will do and have been gathered together to do. So here I'll read it, verse 19. And I saw the wild beast and the kings of the earth and their armies gathered together to wage the war with the one seated on the horse and with his army. And the wild beast was caught, and along with it the false prophet that performed in front of it the signs with which he misled those who received the mark of the wild beast and those who render worship to its image. And so yes, some of these kings of the earth will receive the mark of the wild beast. These are the evil slave, the Apostle John's peers, the men with the hope to be rulers over the 12 tribes of Israel and to be part of the 144,000 other chosen kings. Now, the next time it mentions these kings of the earth, it doesn't call them kings of the earth, because now their situation has changed. And this is the situation for the kings of the earth who are faithful and follow Jesus Christ and have not been deceived into gathering together to that place called Armageddon to do battle against Jesus Christ. And so here it is in Revelation chapter 20 and verse 4. And I saw thrones, and there were those who sat down on them, and power of judging was given them. Yes, I saw the souls of those executed with the axe for the witness they bore to Jesus, and for speaking about God, and those who had worshipped neither the wild beast nor its image, and who had not received the mark upon their forehead and upon their hand. And they came to life and ruled as kings with the Christ for 1,000 years. And so now, this verse in Revelation chapter 20 is talking about the extraordinary blessing that's now extended to those who are faithful, the kings of the earth, who endure faithful to the end and are not deceived by the wild beast and the inspired utterances coming from the false prophet and Satan and the demons. And so these kings will rule on thrones. And so this book, the book of Revelation, is all about these kings of the earth. You can read through this book without having to be concerned about the symbology. If you just stick to the main theme, the theme about John's fellow slaves, the kings of the earth, then it begins to make sense. This is what happens immediately after Jesus Christ comes and finishes this battle. The kings do get thrones and begin to rule in their kingdom. You can be certain that the 10 kings who gave away their power to the wild beast will not be amongst these. And so the scripture in Genesis chapter 49 is correct. Those 10 men will not attain the blessing. Only 2 of them will. The kings of the earth are mentioned one more time in the book of Revelation, this time in chapter 21. And this time they are in a city, and it's the real city, not the corrupted modern day city of Babylon, the modern day Jerusalem, but this is the heavenly Jerusalem that comes down to earth. And I'll read it. It starts in chapter 21, I'll start in verse 22. And I did not see a temple in it, for Jehovah God the Almighty is its temple. Also the Lamb is. And the city has no need of the sun nor of the moon to shine upon it, for the glory of God lighted it up, and its lamp was the Lamb. And the nations will walk by means of its light, and the kings of the earth will bring their glory into it. So, will the kings of the earth who bring their glory into it, into the new Jerusalem, the holy city, will those kings of the earth be the same kings of the earth who committed fornication with the harlot, with Babylon the Great? Will they be the ones who weep and beat themselves? No, they won't. They will be the ones who used the book of Revelation to see through Satan's unrighteous deception and to follow Jesus Christ. They'll also battle with those other kings and Satan the devil in the hopes of perhaps saving some of them, their own brothers. So now the book of Revelation should be thoroughly understood without the means of understanding any of the symbology. So if you've watched through these videos up to this point, then now I strongly urge you to read the book of Revelation again, only this time look for those slaves of Jesus Christ, the fellow slaves of John, the kings of the earth, and realize that when the book of Revelation speaks of the kings of the earth, these are the men who have the opportunity to rule as kings, to sit on thrones. 12 to judge the 12 tribes of Israel, and then the remaining ones of the 144,000 will also be kings. They will rule the earth with Jesus Christ. And you can ignore most of the symbology. You don't have to worry about it. Just watch for those places where it mentions these kings of the earth. The audience, the main audience for the book of Revelation. And now I also urge you to watch the rest of the videos on my YouTube channel, in my blog, read my book, because I'll explain to you how the mark of the beast is received, how the number is calculated, and a few other things in the book of Revelation.